nice. You know, it's one of those things where you're like, man, they only do one thing. That's got to be easy. It's not easy to do one thing and do it consistently over and over and over and over. You know, when you're making multiple products, it's easy to just blend and do what you're doing, which there is an art to blending, absolutely, you know, and that's a little bit back and forth. When it comes to the oldest registered distillery in the world, Bushmills is it. Nobody really argues that. So when you look at history and tradition, you can't really get better than what's going on here. And again, this is all they make. I was lucky enough to visit them last year, and it's beautiful. I mean, so the distillery they're in now was rebuilt after the other one burnt down. So you're looking at the current facility in 1883, something like that. Again, the dates are, I don't worry about the dates. It's like what's in the bottle for me. And it's beautiful. So it's on the northern coast of Ireland, and it's going to be literally 1.5 miles from Giant's Causeway, which is just one of the most beautiful things you'll ever see in the world as far as the stone formations go. So little things like that for me give stories to the brands, because the idea is, you know, we're storytellers, and bartenders are storytellers, and you're the storyteller as well. So I make relationships to why the juice tastes the way it does with a story, because what the story relates to bartenders, that when you're able to tell a story that connects with, say, something that you know or you're personally involved with this brand. So I can go and say, like, you know what, I've been drinking Black Bush for a long time, and it's got a personal relationship to me. If I can find a personal relationship with a brand and relate that to my bartender, they can relate that to their guest, and this personal connection continues to grow. At the end of the day, we're storytellers, and that's all we're doing. So what is the story of the brand? What is interesting? What is that one-liner that a bartender can identify with to identify you with the brand? Because, you know, obviously not everybody has the chance to go visit Bushmills and to go there, but how can we make them identify with that experience, identifying with the brand? And that's where I think, again, the stories come in why the juice tastes the way that it does. Obviously, we have the flagship here, Bushmills. Irish whiskey must be aged minimum 3 years, and American, well, it doesn't have to be American oak, but in oak. Regular Bushmills is going to be obviously at least 3 years, American oak. Yeah, this is going to be kind of a standard when it comes to Irish whiskey that's out there. You know, is it Jameson? No, it's going to be different than Jameson. So it's one of those things where people sometimes look at Jameson as this standard, you know, and obviously Bushmills tastes different because it is a different product. I mean, you're looking at the northern side of the island to the southern point of the island. I mean, it's a small island, but there's still quite a difference when it comes to aging and the process. Black Bush. Now, this is one that I think, when it comes to craft accounts and people that are really getting into the craft side of bartending, is really special. I've actually always been a fan of Black Bush. So you're definitely going to have a lot more malted barley in this bottle than the regular Bushmill. So obviously there can be neutral grain inside of Irish whiskey. Again, that's what makes it kind of soft to drink. I mean, Irish whiskey is a softer whiskey. With only 3 years of aging, need to be called Irish whiskey in that very temperate climate. It's not going to be like in Kentucky where 3 years you're going to get a lot of, you know, active, fresh barrel on that. It's, again, very soft. I mean, just look. Obviously, we're looking at different age statements here, but just the difference in color of Bushmills next to the Bullet. Obviously, Bullet, we're looking at, you know, minimum 6 years there for our Bullet, but just the color difference there, because a lot of that color that it will get is pretty much right at the beginning. You know, when you put whiskey in barrels in Kentucky, it's pretty active when it first goes in. You know, obviously putting White Dog into a barrel, you're going to see most of that color come off pretty quick in the first 3 years probably. But Black Bush, what makes it again special is obviously a lot more malted barley in this, and then obviously sherry cask aging. Sherry right now in the craft movement is huge. I mean, everybody loves sherry. They're starting to learn more about it, how unique the wine is and how the aging process changes from Amontillado, from Oloroso, and what makes things different there. But it's going to give it this great cherry, dry it out a bit. Again, it just adds so much more depth when it comes to the sherry casks used in the Black Bush. And again, it really lends itself to craft cocktails so much. There's not many classic cocktails when it comes to Irish whiskey, but I'm going to make a Tipperary with this Blackbush, and it's basically like a bee juice. It's basically just sweet vermouth and green chartreuse, and that's it. And it is magical with this because it just gives it so much depth. So sherry casking in this is just so big when it comes to that. Obviously the Irish honey is new. They wanted to try something new. Obviously flavored whiskey is becoming a big part of whiskey in general. I mean, you're looking at American whiskey producers doing it all over the place. But I think it's a great way to introduce females into drinking whiskey. You know, I mean, I don't think it's overly honey by any means. It's definitely has it there, but it's a great way to get females into drinking Irish whiskey. Questions on Bushmills, guys? I just love being able to talk about it. So, I mean, Blackbush, again, what's the story there? Obviously, the oldest registered distillery in the world. There's no argument there. We're on the north coast of Ireland, one of the most beautiful places on the planet, next to Giant's Causeway. So when it comes to me naming cocktails, or when it comes to, I try to name them about a story, like, and I'll get into the mixology side of it, but like if I, you know, make a cocktail with a Blackbush or something like that, I'm going to, you know, Giant's Collins. If I just wanted to make a whiskey Collins with it, basically a whiskey sour with soda water, you know, I'll just call it a Causeway Collins. And, you know, people ask, well, what does that mean? Oh, well, it's right next to the Giant's Causeway, and damn, there's a natural story to push along. I'm not forcing anything. You always want the information and history of the brand to come across naturally. And I think that's where it comes to finding what your personal story is, and what your personal relationship is with the brand. Because again, if you have a personal relationship with the brand and you can relay that to whoever you're speaking to, man, it creates that dialogue that's back and forth, which is what bartenders are trying to do. I mean, I think everybody in this room knows that this industry is built on relationships. I mean, that's just standard. Dickel, the other Tennessee whiskey. If you only know Jack, you don't know Dickel. Obviously, there's a lot of history when it comes to this brand as well. When it comes to you know, 1880s and you know, George Dickel distilling and you know, Tennessee, and then he's him selling his rights to the company and his children selling the rights as well, and then being started up again after Prohibition. Because I mean, obviously the brand was in production before Prohibition. Prohibition happened, and you know, it had to shut down. Then new facilities were opened up after that. But you know, now we're looking at the Cascades and where it is currently, and you're looking at, you know, 2 distillers that have ever distilled there. So there still is a lot of heritage. So when the distillery opened, they looked at old recipes from the family and they're trying to recreate that. But obviously, first, what makes Tennessee whiskey Tennessee whiskey? Does anybody know offhand? Charcoal filtering. The Lincoln County process, charcoal filtering. That's what makes Tennessee whiskey different from other. But when you look at the juice in the bottle, again, I think it stands up for itself. And they're obviously doing more than one product, and I think they're hitting different marks. The Cascade is the red label that came out, obviously, when... it's back there. So the Cascade, yeah, I see it back over there. So the Cascade is a little bit younger whiskey because George Dickel was producing, then they decided to stop producing. And when they stopped producing, they wanted to, obviously the market value to go up, which it did. So when the distillery opened again in 2005, there was a shortage of number 8. So that's when they decided to introduce the Cascade, because they wanted to get some other whiskey out there. And I think it's still very unique into what it's doing. But obviously the number 8 has been kind of that flagship. And it is number 8. I mean, a lot of bartenders, as soon as they see a number on a bottle, they just think aging. And obviously it's not an 8-year whiskey. I mean, it's not. But I mean, on average, it's going to be anywhere from 4 to 6 years on average on the number 8. 80 proof. So for me, proof is a big part of whiskey and why people are trying to decide what they want to do and what they have in the bottle. So obviously Cascade's 80, number 8's at 80, Charleston's at 90. So proofing is very big when it comes to whiskey in my eyes. Obviously there's heat that comes off of proof, and there's heat that comes off of where the barrels sit in the rack house. So that's one thing you want to think of as well when it comes to heat and spice. There are definitely 2 different flavors that I think a lot of people get a little bit confused with, because If I have a barrel sitting on the 7th floor of a rack house and the 1st floor of the rack house, the 7th floor is going to be a lot hotter than the 1st floor. So obviously that higher temperature is going to, it's going to translate to what's in the barrel. The proofs might be exactly the same when they come out of the barrel, depending on how long they sit, but obviously that barrel that sits up at the top is going to taste just a lot hotter. And if we put both of them at 90 proof, it's going to taste different, obviously. I mean, sometimes they say that they taste barrels one right next to the other, and they still taste different. And there's a science behind that, but a lot of times it's the good old boys that are just like, you know what, let's just mix and do a whiskey. Obviously, there's an art of blending barrels to the flavor that they want. So the number 8, 80 proof. Again, for me, this is just one that is, an entry whiskey to an extent, like 80 proof. I personally drink a lot of 90 proofs, so you're going to see a lot of 90 proofs be really popular in the cocktail world. Obviously, I think that's one of the reasons why Bullet is doing so well. A little bit 90 proof, a little bit spicier, that high rye content, they want to be there.